Geez, this daughter-in-law. Because she grew up in a poor family, even the clothes she wears look cheap. What's with that cheap thing? LOL, my mother-in-law splashed tea on my dress. This is... When I muttered that, my mother-in-law turned pale. My name is Sunny. I'm turning 28 this year. I got married to my husband 2 years ago, and now I'm a full-time housewife. Our in-laws live next to us, and my father-in-law works as a tailor. My husband is the only son in his family, so he helps his father with his work. The house we live in is one of the 2 houses that my father-in-law built, and we are renting it. The houses lined up on the spacious land are old but really nice houses. I once asked my father-in-law about the time when he built the house, and my father-in-law replied, "I got it built cheaply by an old acquaintance. It didn't cost much money," he said. My father-in-law was a skilled and quiet person. He was especially kind to me as his daughter-in-law. He said, "At this age, it feels like I gained a daughter. Please take care of my son." I remember when I first met my father-in-law, he said such things to me. At that moment, I felt glad that I became a part of this family. However, it wasn't all good. What's this? Such cheap and tacky things. Don't put them in my son's house. Since the beginning of our marriage, my mother-in-law frequently visited our home. We had given them a spare key to our house, in case of emergency, but my mother-in-law would barge into our house for no reasons, and she would make sarcastic remarks about me every time. That's why I dislike daughters from poor families. Their clothes and belongings all reek of poverty. It's true that I prefer modest things over flashy ones, and my own family was also a dual-income household. My mother-in-law would point at me and make sarcastic remarks calling me a poor person. My mother-in-law was fond of flashy things, and she often wore branded clothes, bags, and accessories. She would boast about her favorite items, as how much the clothes were, and from which boutique she bought the bags. As you can tell from all those purchases, she has a habit of spending lavishly, and I heard that my mother-in-law spends most of the money that my father-in-law earns. Just like with my relationship with my father-in-law, I wanted to have a good relationship with my mother-in-law. Although my husband and I didn't have children yet, as a mother who raised an only son, there were many things I wanted to learn from my mother-in-law. However, it seemed my mother-in-law had no intention of being like a mother to me. I had no choice but to give up on having a good relationship with her. Despite such days, my father-in-law and husband continued to treat me kindly, and it wasn't a big deal because I could just smile politely and let it slide when my mother-in-law made sarcastic remarks. However, one day, I found my clothes torn and thrown away in the trash bin at home. Oh, that? I threw away those cheap-looking clothes because they're not needed in my son's house. The clothes that were thrown away were already old, so I responded with my usual polite smile. Oh, haha. I was actually planning to get rid of them too. Thank you. However, from that day on, my mother-in-law's behavior started escalating. One day, all my cosmetics had disappeared. They were later found on the wash basin, completely empty. When I asked my mother-in-law, she said, "You use such cheap cosmetics, that's why you come across as poor. Since they're gone, just buy new ones." The cosmetics I've been using were slightly expensive ones. I used them sparingly, not wasting them, but they were all washed away down the wash basin. Additionally, other accessories such as earrings and necklaces started being thrown away without permission. Even brand new like clothes started getting discarded. When you look poor, it embarrasses me and our son. Please buy better things. Just so you know, don't use the money our son earned. Work for yourself and buy things with your own money. My husband cares about me and suggested buying clothes and things that wouldn't make my mother-in-law angry, but I didn't want to use his money, which he worked so hard to earn. However, whenever I tried to save money and buy cheap things, my mother-in-law's actions escalated even further. My mother-in-law's actions escalate even further. My mother-in-law's actions escalate even further. I had endured it all for so long, but there was one moment when I found the dress that my mother had bought for me. When I got married, ripped to shreds with scissors, I couldn't help but cry alone. One day, amid such continuous incidents, we received news that a tea party would be held for my father-in-law and my husband's business associates. Usually, my husband would attend in place of his father, but he had recently slipped on a wet stone and suffered a severe injury with a broken leg. My father-in-law told him to skip this time, but my husband, due to business dealings, said he couldn't be absent. Sonny, I'm sorry, but could you and Mom attend the upcoming tea party together? My husband also knew that my mother-in-law's harassment against me was getting worse. My husband seemed to have complained to his mother about it, but even so, she didn't intend to stop. Given that he knew about the relationship between me and my mother-in-law, my husband approached me with an apologetic look and asked me for a favor. It's okay. It's an important tea party with a valued business partner, right? I'll do anything I can, I replied. There was a sense of relief that my mother-in-law probably wouldn't harass me if there were people watching, and I also had a desire to support my hardworking husband. Sometime later, as the tea party approached, I was summoned by my mother-in-law, who had come to our house as usual. You've heard about the tea party from our son, haven't you? I've participated in them before, and I have connections with our business partners. Make sure to wear something nice that won't bring shame upon me, my mother-in-law said before leaving. After she left, I was at a loss for what to do. Since our family runs a tailor shop, I had always thought it would be more appropriate to attend wearing a nice dress, but I don't own such luxurious dress myself. I thought about asking my mother if she could send me one of her expensive dresses. However, I couldn't do that because I knew that my mother-in-law would tear it apart. At that moment, I was summoned by my father-in-law. At my in-laws' house, there is my father-in-law's workplace. My father-in-law summoned me there. It was rare for my father-in-law to call me out, but as I headed towards the room, I saw an unfamiliar man and my father-in-law inside. The man, whom I didn't know, appeared to be around the same age as my father-in-law, and he was smiling. Sorry for calling you suddenly. We've known each other for a long time. He is currently the owner of a dress shop. As I greeted him, the person returned the greeting with a cheerful smile. I noticed that he was wearing strangely old clothes. He had a relaxed demeanor, and was having a friendly conversation with my father-in-law. By the way, Summer, did you hear something unpleasant from my wife? My father-in-law was concerned about me. I replied with a forced smile. No, I'm fine. But my father-in-law, seeing me like that, handed me a dress in a fancy box. As far as I know, this is the most beautiful dress. You should wear this for the upcoming tea ceremony. No one would complain. I immediately asked how he got this dress. My father-in-law, while patting the shoulder of an acquaintance, said, I borrowed this dress from this guy. There was no money involved. Feel free to wear it without hesitation. The acquaintance of my father-in-law also laughed and lent it to me. Although I hesitated, unable to resist my usually reserved father-in-law's words, I accepted the dress. I didn't know much about dresses, but I thought it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to wear such a beautiful one. With deep gratitude towards the two people who lent me the dress, I left the room. On the day, I put on the dress that I borrowed, and we headed to the venue of the tea ceremony. The dress I was wearing wasn't mine, but for some reason, I felt proud of it. As the tea ceremony began, people dressed in beautiful dresses were engaged in conversations throughout the venue. My mother-in-law, who came with us, was mingling and chatting among those people. She was wearing a bright and flashy red dress. I thought it was a suitable dress for my mother-in-law, who usually disliked anything that seemed poor. While my mother-in-law was enjoying the tea ceremony, being unfamiliar with the proper etiquette, I stayed quietly in the corner of the room, trying not to embarrass my husband and father-in-law. Then my mother-in-law beckoned me, motioning for me to come closer. So, this is my daughter-in-law, she said as if she wanted to introduce me while she was bragging about her son. When I greeted them, the other person returned the greeting cheerfully. After that, my mother-in-law continued to talk one-sidedly to other participants. As I glanced at the faces of the attendees, I could see a slight displeasure on some of them. I am the wife of a tailor, so I understand the quality of dresses better than anyone else. Your dresses look very good on you, everyone. My mother-in-law spoke, her gaze directed at me. On the other hand, this daughter-in-law of mine, she's just terrible. Since she grew up in a poor family, even the clothes she wears look cheap. My mother-in-law then splashed the tea she was holding onto my dress. I panicked and fretted over the tea stains spreading on the dress. It was more shocking to me that I had dirtied the borrowed dress than being spilled tea on. It's the owner of the dress shop, I murmured, and my mother-in-law abruptly stopped laughing. At that moment, does my dress look cheap to you? The acquaintance of my father-in-law, who had lent me the dress, approached us and said, however, the atmosphere was completely different from the previous encounter. The man, who had a smile earlier, now has a dignified expression on his face. He was wearing old clothes earlier, but he is now neatly dressed in a suit. This person turned out to be the owner of a major dress shop, and he is someone well known in the industry that almost everyone would recognize. Sensing something, my mother-in-law greeted him awkwardly, with a strained expression, but the face of the dress shop owner remained stiffened. The dress that Sunny is wearing is the one I lent her. This dress is a top-grade piece, and it's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. far from being cheap, but it seems to appear as a poor quality item in your eyes," my mother-in-law muttered, and her face turned pale as she made excuses. However, the owner of the dress shop didn't accept her explanation. I quickly apologized for staining the borrowed dress. But the owner of the dress shop smiled at me, just as he did when he was with my father-in-law. "Sonny, you don't have to worry about it. The dress is fine. Why don't you change your dress over there?" While the owner of the dress shop said that, he handed me a handkerchief and guided me outside the venue, accompanying me. When I turned around, my mother-in-law's face was ashen. After the tea ceremony ended, the incident that occurred there was brought to the attention of my father-in-law and husband. "Do you even realize what you've done? It's beyond outrageous." My mother-in-law ended up receiving a scolding from both my father-in-law and husband. During the confrontation, the topic of her harassment against me in the past came up, and she was further interrogated. "Wait a moment! Isn't it her fault because she always wore cheap-looking clothes? Why did she wear such an expensive dress to a tea ceremony anyway?" Even my father-in-law, who is usually quiet, became furious at my mother-in-law's attitude, which she didn't even consider herself at fault. My husband looked at her with cold eyes. Considering the past instances of harassment and the embarrassment caused to me during this tea ceremony, my husband stated that he had run out of patience, even though she was his mother, and he made her promise that she leaves us alone. My father-in-law, who is still enraged, asked her for a divorce. "Divorce? It's not something that needs to go that far. If we just get rid of this poor daughter-in-law, everything will be resolved." My mother-in-law's words only further angered my father-in-law, and my husband refrained from interfering in their divorce matter. On the other hand, as for that dress, a few days after the tea ceremony, the owner of the dress shop visited our house. "The dress is absolutely fine. It has been properly cleaned and restored," he told us. I felt relieved to hear those words. If the stain stayed on the dress, I wouldn't have known how to face him. However, the owner of the dress shop smiled warmly at us. Both my father-in-law and I repeatedly apologized for staining the dress over and over again. In particular, my father-in-law apologized profusely. He even went as far as saying, "I have lost your trust. I can't complain if you cut ties with me." However, the owner of the dress shop said, "We have been friends for decades, so don't worry about it. If you can make another beautiful dress for me, that would be enough." However, that didn't calm my father-in-law's anger. As a result of discussions, the cost of restoring the dress would be borne by my mother-in-law. It amounted to tens of thousands of dollars. My mother-in-law had hoped that my father-in-law would shoulder the responsibility, but instead of taking on the burden, he refused to sell any of the extravagant items that she had purchased in the past. He even forced my mother-in-law into substantial debt, and ultimately kicked her out of the house. "I haven't done anything wrong, have I? It's that poor-looking person's fault." My mother-in-law continued to lament, showing no signs of remorse until the end. The branded items my mother-in-law had collected were all sold off by my father-in-law, and the money was used as a gift for the owner of the dress shop. The remaining amount was passed on to me. "We have caused you so much pain, Sonny. I won't ask for your forgiveness, but please, I only ask that you continue to support our son in the future. I had no reason to blame my father-in-law. In order to appease him, I accepted the money, but I intended to use that money for the sake of my father-in-law and husband. Some time later, it seems that my mother-in-law made a phone call, begging for money. I wasn't present at the time, but my father-in-law and husband refused to entertain her request. They told her, "You've done something irreparable. If you call again, we will contact the police," and then hung up the phone. According to rumors, my mother-in-law moved in with relatives and is working unfamiliar daily wage jobs to repay her debts. Currently, the three of us are living in a house that was rebuilt by merging two households. As we were renovating, my husband and I considered sharing the expenses equally with my father-in-law, but my father-in-law said, "I don't need much money for myself, and I was actually planning to expand my workspace anyway. Don't worry about the money for the house. Use your money for the grandchild who will be born." He said. I was touched by his words, and it reaffirmed my determination to be with this family. And this spring, our first daughter will be born. My reserved father-in-law tries to act tough and doesn't say much, but it's clear that he's feeling anxious. When our daughter grows up, I plan to consult with my father-in-law and the owner of the dress shop to have a splendid dress tailored for her. I'm sure she will look beautiful in that dress.